Shut the site down now, Vance. Park every crane. WSDOT is freezing your funds. The state inspector's voice crackled on the speaker while he slapped a red condemnation notice on our $50 million bridge abutment. Victor looked like he'd seen a ghost. I just watched from my truck, sipping lukewarm coffee. But to understand how we got to that rainy Tuesday morning on the Olympic Peninsula, you have to go back 6 months. My name is Arthur Pendelton. For exactly 19 years and 9 months, I was the principal project estimator at Apex Infrastructure Corporation. If you've driven over a bridge or through a highway bypass in Washington state, there's a good chance I calculated the cost of every cubic yard of concrete, every ton of rebar, and every hour of union labor that built it. In civil contracting, estimating isn't just about math, it's about risk. You're bidding on projects years before a shovel hits the dirt. A miscalculation of 5 cents a pound on structural steel can bankrupt a company. I survived in this business because I was thorough. I kept my head down, lived in spreadsheets, and checked every supplier quote twice. For most of my career, Apex was run by Frank Caldwell. Frank was an old-school dirt mover. He grew up on construction sites, smelled like diesel and wet soil, and knew the name of every superintendent on our payroll. Frank hired me when Apex was just a regional outfit. Over 2 decades, we grew it into a premier heavy civil contractor. Frank had one simple rule: build it right or don't build it at all. He knew that in public works, your reputation is your only currency, but Frank's knees gave out, and his doctor told him to retire. Last year, he sold his majority stake to a private equity firm out of Chicago. That's when the suits arrived. They brought in Victor Vance as our new chief operating officer. Victor was a young, sharp-faced executive who wore $3,000 suits to dusty job trailers. He had a degree in finance, a background in corporate turnaround, and zero understanding of civil engineering. To Victor, concrete wasn't a structural material. It was a line item that could be squeezed. Within his first 30 days, Victor laid off our entire safety auditing team and replaced them with a single contract inspector who visited sites once a month. Then, he restructured our estimation department. He wanted us to start underbidding projects by using cheaper materials and forcing subcontractors to eat the cost overruns. I remember our first meeting in the glass-walled boardroom at our Seattle headquarters. Victor sat at the head of the table, tapping a gold pen against his tablet. "Arthur," he said, looking at me with a cold, analytical gaze, "your estimates are too conservative. You're budgeting for worst-case scenarios. We're losing bids to firms that are leaner." "Victor," I replied, leaning back in my chair, "we're bidding on WSDOT projects. They have strict specifications. If we use substandard aggregates or cut corners on soil stabilization, the state will reject the work. We'll end up paying liquidated damages that will wipe out any margin we have." Victor smiled, a thin, humorless stretch of his lips. "That's why we negotiate change orders after we win the bid. The goal is to get the contract first. We'll figure out how to make it profitable on the ground. That's not how public infrastructure works," I warned him. WSDOT has inspectors on site daily. If you play games with their specs, they'll freeze your progress payments. "We'll see," Victor said. Shortly after that, Victor made another move. He created a new position, project director for the Highway 101 bypass. It was a $50 million state contract we had just secured, a critical bypass route designed to handle heavy logging trucks and tourist traffic. To fill the role, Victor bypassed 3 of our senior project managers who had decades of highway experience. Instead, he hired Ryan Vance. Ryan was 29 years old. He was Victor's nephew. He had a degree in construction management from a school that didn't require him to ever touch dirt, and he walked around the job site in brand new Red Wing boots that didn't have a single scratch on them. Ryan was arrogant, condescending, and viewed the veteran superintendents as relics of a bygone era. From day one, Ryan's objective was clear: speed up the timeline and cut costs to meet the quarterly milestone bonuses Victor had set up for him. I was watching this unfold with a growing sense of unease. But I had a very specific reason to keep my head down and not make waves. When Frank Caldwell sold the company, he took care of a few of the old-timers who had helped him build Apex. In my employment contract, Frank had inserted a retirement vesting clause. If I completed 20 years of continuous service with Apex, I would receive a lump sum retirement package of $250,000 paid out in vested company shares. I was exactly 3 months away from hitting that 20-year mark. I could see the writing on the wall. Victor wanted to replace the old guard with younger, cheaper labor who wouldn't question his methods. I knew he was looking for any excuse to push me out before that $250,000 package vested. If he could fire me for cause, the company would claw back the shares, and Victor would look like a hero to the private equity board for cutting overhead. So I did my job. I reviewed the submittals, I checked the invoices. I made sure every estimate I produced was backed by ironclad vendor quotes and engineering sign-offs. I documented everything, every email, every text, every change order proposal. I backed them up to my personal server. I wasn't planning a war, but in this business you always keep a paper trail. The real trouble started in May, when we began pouring the concrete for the main bridge abutments on the Highway 101 project. The bypass bridge was designed to span a deep ravine with highly active seismic activity. The specifications from DOSDOT were clear. The concrete for the support piers and abutments had to be a specialized mix with a minimum compressive strength of 4,000 pounds per square inch, or 4,000 psi, after 28 days. WSDOT required independent laboratory testing for every pour, using concrete test cylinders cast right at the hopper. Ryan Vance decided that the specified mix was too expensive. He thought he found a way to save $200,000 on the concrete supply alone by switching to a local supplier that used a cheaper aggregate mix. Our lead superintendent on site, a veteran named Bill, told Ryan that the cheaper mix wouldn't hit the strength requirements under the damp, cold conditions of the Olympic Peninsula. Ryan ignored him, telling Bill that if he didn't like the decision, he could hand in his hard hat. By the second week of June, the first set of 28-day strength tests came back from the lab. I was sitting in my office at our Seattle headquarters, a cold mug of coffee on my desk, looking at the Procore dashboard. Procore is the project management software we use to track submittals, RFIs, and daily logs. One of my duties was to review the material test results before approving the monthly progress billing. I opened the folder for the Highway 101 bypass project, specifically the submittals for the bridge abutment concrete pours. The testing was done by Northwest Geotech, an independent testing laboratory WSDOT had approved. They cast concrete cylinders during the pours, cured them in water tanks, and then crushed them at 7, 14, and 28 days to measure the compressive strength. I clicked on the latest PDF report uploaded to the system. It was signed by the lab manager at Northwest Geotech. According to the report, the concrete cylinders from the main structural pier, Pier 3, which supported the western span, had a compressive strength of 4,050 psi. That was above the 4,000 psi minimum. I was about to sign off on the monthly billing sheet when something caught my eye. The document property showed the PDF had been modified. Normally, Northwest Geotech uploads their reports directly to our Procore system via an API integration. Their files are locked and read-only, but this file had been uploaded manually. I clicked on the Procore system audit trail, a hidden log that tracks every single user action, file download, upload, and deletion. What I saw made my stomach drop. 2 days earlier at 9 p.m., Ryan Vance's user account had logged into Procore. He had downloaded the original PDF report uploaded by Northwest Geotech. 10 minutes later, he had uploaded a new file with the exact same name, overwriting the original. I went to my personal archive. As a precaution, I had set up a script that mirrored all incoming API uploads from our subcontractors to a secure local folder on my computer before anyone could modify them. It was a tool I'd built years ago to catch billing discrepancies. I opened the mirrored copy of the original Northwest Geotech report. The actual compressive strength for the Pier 3 cylinders wasn't 4,050 psi. It was 2,200 psi. 2,200. That's barely stronger than sidewalk concrete. Under the weight of loaded timber trucks and the seismic shear forces of the Olympic Peninsula, those piers would eventually crack and fail. It wasn't a matter of if. It was a matter of when. Ryan had used a cheap PDF editor to change the 2 to a 4, slapped the lab manager's digital signature back on it, and uploaded it to the state database. He did this because WSDOT's contract specified that if the concrete strength fell below 90% of the design requirement, the contractor had to either tear out the structure and repower it at their own expense, or accept a massive price reduction and face extended liability. Tearing it out would have cost Apex over $1 million and delayed the project by 2 months. That would have wiped out Ryan's quarterly bonus and exposed Victor's budget-cutting strategy to the board. But worse, Ryan had already submitted the monthly progress payment application. Liz.formed at 271,005, claiming $8 million for the completed concrete works. To get the money, the form required my signature as the Chief Estimator, certifying that the build work complied with DOS. Standard Specifications, Section 6-02. I printed out the original lab report, the modified report, and the Procore audit trail showing Ryan's IP address and login timestamp. I walked down the hall to Victor's corner office. I didn't knock. I just opened the door and walked in. Victor was on a call, but when he saw the look on my face, he hung up. Ryan was sitting on the leather sofa, scrolling through his phone. "Arthur," Victor said, his voice flat. "What's so urgent?" I laid the 3 sheets of paper on his mahogany desk. "We have a problem on the 101 bypass. Pier 3's concrete failed the 28-day test. It came in at 2200 psi. Ryan didn't even look up from his phone. "The report on Procore says 4000. I checked it myself." "You checked the one you edited, Ryan," I said, turning to him. "I have the audit log. I have the original API file from Northwest Geotech before you overwrote it on Tuesday night at 9:12 p.m. You committed fraud on a state-funded project." Ryan's face turned red. He stood up, dropping his phone onto the couch. "Watch your mouth, Arthur. You're an estimator. You don't manage the field. We had a minor curing issue, and we did our own calculations. The structure is fine. A curing issue doesn't justify forging an independent lab report, Ryan," I said. "And it doesn't change the fact that the concrete is structurally deficient. If we sign off on this, we're violating federal and state laws." Victor picked up the papers. He looked at the Procore audit trail, then at the original test report. His expression didn't change. He didn't look surprised. He looked annoyed that he had been caught. "Arthur," Victor said, his voice dropping to a low, commanding tone. "Sit down." "I'll stand," I replied. "Listen to me carefully," Victor said, leaning forward. "This project is 60% complete. If we tell the state we have to demo Pier 3, WSDOT will suspend our pre-qualification status. We won't be able to bid on any public works in Washington for the next 3 years. Apex will go under. Do you want to explain to 200 field workers why they don't have jobs next week?" "They won't have jobs anyway if the bridge collapses and the company gets sued into bankruptcy," I countered. "I'm not signing the DOT 271,005 certification. Not for this work." Victor's eyes narrowed. "You're going to sign it, Arthur. It's your job. You verify the billings. I run this company and I tell you what we certify." "My contract says I certify that the work conforms to the contract documents," I said. "This concrete doesn't conform. I won't put my name on a federal fraud case." Victor stared at me for a long, silent moment. Then he stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the Seattle skyline. "You've been here a long time, Arthur," he said, his back to me. "But you've become rigid. You're not a team player. You're holding this company back from its growth potential." He turned around. "If you refuse to perform your duties, you are in breach of your employment agreement. I am terminating your employment with Apex Infrastructure Corporation, effective immediately, for cause." I felt a cold prickle of anger, but I kept my voice steady. "For cause on what grounds?" "Insubordination, failure to execute your assigned tasks." "Creating a hostile work environment," Victor said, listing the charges off his fingers. "Your termination letter will be sent to HR by noon." "We both know why you're doing this, Victor," I said. "You want to claw back my retirement vesting package. My $250,000. Victor gave a small, dismissive shrug. "Terminations for cause. Forfeit all unvested equity and bonuses. That's standard corporate policy. You can check your handbook on your way out." Ryan smirked from the couch. I looked at Victor, then at Ryan. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I had spent 20 years in this industry, and I knew that when a fight starts, the person who screams first is the one who loses. "I'll need 30 minutes to pack my personal belongings," I said. "You have 10, Victor replied. "A security guard will escort you to your desk." 10 minutes later, I walked out of the Apex building carrying a single cardboard box. The security guard watched me load it into the back of my F-150. I sat in the driver's seat, started the engine, and took a deep breath. They thought they had won. They thought they had saved their project, hidden their fraud, and saved the company $250,000 by throwing an old estimator out on the street. They had no idea who they were dealing with. When you spend 20 years bidding on public works, you learn how the machinery operates. You learn that corporations aren't held together by their leaders, but by their legal and financial guardrails. And the heaviest guardrail of all is the surety bond. On a $50 million state highway project, the government doesn't just trust a contractor to do the job. Under the Miller Act, the contractor must secure a performance bond from a certified Treasury-listed surety company. This bond is a three-party agreement between the state, the obligee, the contractor, the principal, and the surety. If the contractor defaults, walks away, or builds something so poorly that it has to be torn down, the surety is financially responsible for finishing the project. Aegis Surety and Casualty Corporation was the firm that backed Apex on the Highway 101 bypass project. They had written a $50 million performance bond. In exchange, Victor Vance had signed a general indemnity agreement, pledging all of Apex's corporate assets, their equipment, their bank accounts, their offices as collateral. If Aegis had to pay a single dollar on a claim, they could seize everything Apex owned. I spent my first afternoon of unemployment sitting at my kitchen table with a pot of black tea, organizing my files. I didn't call Westdot first. If you call a state agency, your report gets routed through 3 different departments, sits on a bureaucrat's desk for 3 weeks, and gives the contractor time to pour more concrete and bury the evidence. Instead, I called Marcus Thorne. Thorne was the senior claims counsel at Aegis Surety in their Seattle regional office. I'd worked with him 10 years ago when Apex had to step in and finish a project for a subcontractor that went bankrupt. He knew me, and more importantly, he knew I didn't waste his time. "Arthur," Thorne said when he picked up the phone, "I heard you left Apex. What's going on?" "I was let go, Marcus," I said. "But that's not why I'm calling. You have an active $50 million performance bond on the Highway 101 bypass." "We do. Apex is 60% through the timeline." "What about it?" "Pier 3's western bridge abutment was poured with substandard mix," I said, my voice calm and analytical. "The 28-day compressive strength test failed. It came in at 2200 psi. Westdot spec is 4000 minimum." There was a brief silence on the line. "If it failed, why hasn't Westdot issued a non-conformance report?" "Our system shows the project is green-lighted because the project director, Ryan Vance, manually modified the Northwest Geotech Laboratory reports on Procore," I explained. "He forged the testing data to show 4050 psi so they could submit their monthly progress billing for $8 million. Are you sure about this, Arthur? That's a federal False Claims Act violation. It's criminal fraud. I'm emailing you the package now," I said. "You'll find the original Northwest Geotech Lab report, the forged version that Ryan uploaded, and the Procore audit trail showing his user ID and IP address overriding the document. I also included the bus.form .271.005 they submitted yesterday morning, certifying the work." I hit send on my email client. "I see it," Thorne said, his voice tightening as he opened the attachments. I could hear the rapid clicking of his mouse as he went through the documents. "Jesus, Arthur, this is black and white forgery. If this pier fails, the liability. If the pier fails, the state will demand a complete demolition and reconstruction," I said. "Under the Miller Act, Westdot will call the bond. Aegis will be on the hook for the entire cost of the rebuild, plus liquidated damages for the delay. You're looking at a $20 million loss." "I need to call our risk committee," Thorne said. "Thank you, Arthur. One more thing, Marcus," I added. "I'm filing a formal whistleblower complaint with the Federal Highway Administration Office of Inspector General and the Westdot Audit Division this afternoon. I'm providing them with the exact same documentation." "Understood," Thorne said. "Keep your phone close." After I hung up, I logged onto the federal whistleblower portal. I filed a report under the False Claims Act. The law contains a key TAM provision, which protects whistleblowers from retaliation and allows them to receive a percentage of any funds recovered by the government due to the fraud. I uploaded the zip file of the metadata, the emails, and the laboratory certificates. Then, I went out to my backyard and mowed the lawn. By Friday morning, the gear wheels of the surety industry had turned. Surety companies are incredibly risk-averse. They don't build bridges, they manage risk. The moment Aegis Surety verified the forgery, their legal department realized they were backing a contractor that was actively falsifying safety records. If they did nothing, they could be accused of complicity or gross negligence, which would void their reinsurance policies. At 8 a.m. on Friday, Apex's executive suite received a certified letter from Aegis Surety. It was a notice of default and immediate suspension of bonding capacity. Under the terms of their indemnity agreement, Aegis demanded that Apex immediately halt all concrete operations on the Highway 101 project. They gave Apex 48 hours to retain an independent third-party structural engineering firm to perform core drilling and testing on Pier 3. Until the concrete's integrity was verified, Aegis suspended Apex's ability to issue any new bids. But the real blow came from the state. When the WUBS. Contract Administration Office received the alert from the surety and my whistleblower report, they had no choice. Under Washington state law, a public contractor cannot operate on a state project without an active, unrestricted performance bond. The moment Aegis suspended the bond's validity pending investigation, Apex was in breach of contract. At 10 a.m., the lead dust inspector drove onto the Olympic Peninsula site, walked up to Ryan Vance, and handed him a formal stop work order. The concrete trucks that were lined up to pour the next section of the bridge deck were ordered to turn around. The workers were sent home. And then Victor Vance's phone started ringing. It didn't take long for the panic to set in. By Monday morning, the halt on the Highway 101 bypass was costing Apex $50,000 a day in liquidated damages. That was just the direct contract penalty. The indirect costs were far worse. We had 5 concrete mixers leased at $10,000 a week sitting idle. We had a crew of 30 union carpenters and ironworkers who had to be paid a minimum show-up guarantee under their collective bargaining agreement, even if they were just sitting in their trucks. And worst of all, WUBS. Had frozen the entire $8 million monthly progress draw. Without that draw, Apex's cash flow went negative. They had payroll to meet for 3 other projects, vendor invoices due by the end of the month, and a heavy equipment lease payment of $400,000 due to Cat Financial. I was sitting in my living room, reading a book on my tablet, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Victor Vance's direct line. I let it ring 3 times, then I answered. Arthur Pendelton. Arthur. Victor's voice was tight, the veneer of corporate professionalism completely gone. What the hell did you do? I had my morning coffee, Victor. What did you do? You think this is funny? Victor hissed. We just got a stop work order from WUBS. Aegis frozen our bonds. You went to the surety, didn't you? You violated your non-disclosure agreement. That NDA you signed when Frank sold the company has a liquidated damages clause of $500,000 for any unauthorized disclosure of proprietary corporate information. I took a slow breath, enjoying the moment. Victor, I'd suggest you consult with Apex's general counsel before you make threats you can't back up. Under both federal and Washington state law, non-disclosure agreements are legally void and unenforceable when they are used to cover up waste, abuse, or criminal fraud. It's a matter of public policy. You can't contract your way out of a federal False Claims Act report. You have no proof of fraud, Victor shouted. It was a technical discrepancy, a sinking issue with Procore's API. We were going to run confirmatory testing next week. You've sabotaged a $50 million public infrastructure project over a software glitch. A software glitch doesn't download a PDF. Change the test results from 2200 psi to 4050 psi using an editor and re-upload it under a forged signature, Victor. Ryan's user log shows he spent 10 minutes editing the file, and the IP address trace points directly to his apartment in Bellevue. WUBS. Investigators are many things, but they aren't stupid. There was a long pause. I could hear Victor breathing heavily on the other end of the line. When he spoke again, the anger was gone, replaced by a desperate, hurried tone. Arthur, look, he said, we can resolve this. We're all adults here. Maybe I was too hasty on Wednesday. The stress of the buyout, the pressure from the board, it got the best of me. You've been a key part of Apex for 20 years. You deserve your retirement. Is that so? I asked. Yes, Victor said quickly. Absolutely. I've already spoken to HR. We can reinstate your employment status retroactively. We'll let you vest your shares. You'll get the full $250,000. I'll even throw in a $50,000 consulting bonus to help us clear up this miscommunication with WUBS. And Aegis. And what exactly would I have to do for that $50,000, Victor? We just need you to sign a statement, Victor said, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. Just a brief affidavit stating that there was an error in the estimation data integration, that you reviewed the concrete tests and they were within acceptable structural variance, and that the Procore logs were corrupted due to a database migration. We'll present it to the WUBS. Contract officer. Once the stop work order is lifted, you can walk away with $300,000 in your pocket. No hard feelings. I couldn't help but chuckle. Victor, you're asking me to sign a false affidavit to cover up a forgery. That's subornation of perjury. That's a Class C felony in Washington state and a federal crime under Title 18 of the U.S. Code. Arthur, be reasonable, Victor urged. Nobody has to go to jail over this. It's a concrete pier. It's got plenty of structural steel in it. It's not going to collapse. I refuse to bet my freedom on your nephew's engineering calculations, Victor, I said. And besides, it's too late. What do you mean it's too late? I filed the whistleblower report with the Federal Highway Administration OIG on Wednesday afternoon, I said. They already pulled the database logs from Procore's servers under a federal administrative subpoena, and Marcus Thorne at Aegis has already notified WSDOT's audit division. The state is sending a crew from a local university's engineering department tomorrow morning to do independent core drilling on Pier 3. They're going to drill 6-inch cores right out of the abutment and test them in a WSDOT lab. You can't hide 2,200 psi concrete from a diamond-tipped core drill. Silence. The kind of silence that happens when someone realizes they've run out of options. Arthur, please, Victor whispered. Talk to your lawyer, Victor, I said. And tell Ryan to start looking for a good criminal defense attorney. He's going to need one. I hung up the phone. The next day, WSDOT's testing crew arrived at the Olympic Peninsula site. They drilled 3 core samples from the Pier 3 bridge abutment. Ryan Vance stood by the silt fence, watching them load the concrete cylinders into the back of a state van. He looked like he wanted to run. 3 days later, the results were published on the WSDOT public portal. The average compressive strength of the cores was 2,180 psi. The bridge abutment was officially condemned. Apex was ordered to demolish the entire structure and rebuild it from the footings up. The bill for the demolition and reconstruction was estimated at $3.2 million, and the clock on the $50,000 a day liquidated damages was still ticking. By the following week, the financial bleed had become a hemorrhage. Apex's private equity owners in Chicago realized they weren't just looking at a $3 million demolition bill and liquidated damages. They were facing corporate debarment. In civil contracting, debarment is the death penalty. It means you are blacklisted from bidding on any federal or state-funded projects for a period of up to 3 years. For a company like Apex, which derived 80% of its revenue from public infrastructure, debarment meant immediate bankruptcy. The board of directors panicked. In an emergency Sunday night meeting, they voted unanimously to terminate Victor Vance and Ryan Vance for gross negligence and willful misconduct, voiding their severance agreements. On Monday morning, I received a call from Elizabeth Kane. She was the outside counsel hired by the board to manage the crisis. She didn't sound like Victor. Her voice was calm, professional, and very, very polite. She asked if I would be willing to meet her and a representative of the board at a quiet conference room in Bellevue. I agreed. I walked into the meeting room wearing my usual canvas jacket and jeans. Elizabeth Kane was sitting at a mahogany table next to a partner from the Chicago private equity firm. Arthur, Elizabeth said, rising to shake my hand. Thank you for coming. Let's make this quick, Elizabeth, I said, sitting down. I have a lot of yard work to finish today. She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. Of course, I'll get straight to the point. The board has reviewed the circumstances of your departure. We've examined the internal Procore logs and the communications between Victor and Ryan Vance. It is clear that you were terminated for refusing to participate in an illegal act, and that your termination was a direct retaliation for flagging safety violations. It was a mistake, and the board deeply regrets how you were treated. I'm glad the board has found its conscience, I said, leaning back. But I suspect you're more concerned about WSDOT's notice of proposed debarment. The private equity partner cleared his throat. Arthur, WSDOT is refusing to speak to our operations team. They've stated they will only discuss a remediation plan if we have a qualified independent third-party auditor overseeing the reconstruction of Pier 3. The state inspector Bill and the regional director both specifically mentioned you. They know your reputation. They know you won't let a single cubic yard of bad concrete onto that site. They're right, I said. I won't. We need you back, Arthur, Elizabeth said, not as an employee, but as an independent quality assurance consultant. You will have full veto power over all material submittals and progress billings for the remainder of the Highway 101 bypass project. WSDOT has agreed to lift the stop work order and suspend the debarment proceedings if you take this role. That sounds like a lot of work, I said, and I was quite enjoying my retirement. Elizabeth pushed a folder across the table. We are prepared to make it worth your while. This is a settlement and consulting agreement. I opened the folder. The terms were laid out in clear, black and white print. First, Apex would retroactively reinstate my employment status to the day before I was fired, allowing my 20-year retirement package to vest fully. The $250,000 in shares would be transferred to my brokerage account immediately. Second, Apex would pay me $300,000 in damages to settle all potential wrongful termination and whistleblower retaliation claims under the False Claims Act. Third, the consulting agreement would pay me a flat rate of $250 an hour, with a guaranteed minimum of 20 hours a week, for the remaining 12 months of the project. I read through the pages, checking the clauses. It was a standard double indemnity settlement. It was clean. "You'll need to pay my attorney fees," I said, looking up. "It's about $5,000. "We will cover that," Elizabeth said without hesitation. "We can wire the funds by Wednesday morning, provided you sign the NDA regarding the terms of this settlement." "I'll sign the settlement NDA," I agreed. "But the whistleblower report to the DOJ and FHWA remains active. I won't withdraw it." "We understand," Elizabeth said. "The board is cooperating fully with the federal investigation. We've already handed over Victor's and Ryan's corporate devices and email archives to the Department of Justice." I pulled my pen from my pocket and signed the agreement. 2 weeks later, I drove back onto the Highway 101 bypass site. My truck tires kicked up the familiar gravel. I put on my white hard hat, the old one with the scratches on it, and walked over to the edge of the ravine. The demolition crew was already at work. A massive excavator equipped with a hydraulic breaker was chipping away at the 2,200 psi concrete of Pier 3, turning Victor's cost-cutting dream into a pile of gray rubble. Ryan Vance wasn't there. The last I heard, he and Victor had been indicted by a federal grand jury for wire fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud against the United States. They were facing up to 20 years in federal prison. The private equity firm was suing Victor civilly to claw back his bonuses and recover the $3 million it was costing to rebuild the abutment. Bill, the lead superintendent, walked up next to me, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Good to have you back, Artie," he said. "Good to be back, Bill," I said, looking at the excavator. "Let's make sure they use the 4,000 psi mix this time." "You bet," Bill smiled. I retired for good a year later, after the bridge was completed and the first logging trucks rolled safely across it. My brokerage account was full, my reputation was intact, and I had helped build something that would stand for 50 years. In the end, I didn't have to fight dirty. I didn't have to scream or break the law. I just had to stand my ground, trust the standards, and let the weight of the system crush the men who thought they could bypass the rules. Because in the civil engineering business, the laws of physics and the laws of contract always win.